Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to try to answer a question that I think a lot of people are wondering about.
Yeah,
How did the UK go from being called the workshop of the world
right.
to dealing with what some are calling this kind of fading pound dream?
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of reports and analyses, and we even found this one historical account. It's called From Riches to Rags. Pretty dramatic title, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to use all this to try to unpack this whole situation.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it gets pretty interesting.
You know, it's fascinating because when you think about the UK and its history,
Yeah.
the idea that it's in decline almost seems to contradict that image they had for so long.
Right.
This was the nation that built a global empire. They were pioneers of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
They practically invented modern finance.
Exactly. So to figure out where things went wrong, I think we need to go back in time a bit.
Okay.
See how that success story actually happened.
Right.
We're talking about the 1800s.
Yeah.
The peak
Yeah.
of British industrial power.
You know, it's hard to overstate just how dominant they were back then.
Yeah.
They weren't just making goods, they were defining entire industries.
Wow.
Like shipbuilding, for example.
Oh, wait.
At one point, Britain was producing almost 60% of the world's ships.
60%.
Wow.
That's incredible.
It's mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
That kind of dominance shaped global trade. It made the UK an economic titan.
Yeah, that really shows you how influential they were. But this success, I mean, it had a hidden cost too, right? Like the seeds of today's economic problems. Were they being planted even back then?
That's the key point.
Yeah.
While Britain was busy building ships and leading the world in textile production, that reliance on those industries actually created vulnerabilities.
Okay.
As other countries industrialized, the UK faced more and more competition.
Right.
Their share of global manufacturing started to shrink.
So it's like they were so good at what they did,
Well,
they
it's like-
couldn't keep up when things started to change.
Exactly. And this brings us to another really important moment, the post-World War II era.
Okay.
The UK, like a lot of Europe, was rebuilding.
Right.
They nationalized key industries. They established the welfare state.
Yeah, the NHS.
Exactly. There was a real sense of collective effort to get back on their feet.
And they did bounce back, right? At least for a while.
Yeah.
Didn't they see some impressive growth in the decades after the war?
It did, and that period shows a different side of the UK's economic story, resilience and a willingness to adapt.
Okay.
But even during this time, there were underlying issues.
Like what?
Their manufacturing base continued to erode, and there was a growing dependence on financial services, especially in London.
Ah, the rise of London as this global financial hub.
Right.
I've read that the Big Bang deregulation in the 1980s had a big impact on that.
Absolutely. The Big Bang basically removed a lot of barriers to entry in the financial markets.
Okay.
It led to a huge influx of investment, turned London into this magnet for international finance. But if we look at the bigger picture, this shift towards finance came at a cost.
Right.
As London boomed, other regions, particularly those former industrial powerhouses, started to fall behind.
That's so interesting. It adds like another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Yeah.
It's not just about the overall decline, but also about the gap between London and the rest of the country.
Exactly. And this imbalance made the UK especially vulnerable when the 2008 financial crisis hit.
Oh, yeah, of course. Because if your economy is built on just one sector
Yeah,
and that sector implodes, well, the whole system's going to feel it.
exactly. The 2008 crisis exposed how fragile the UK's finance-driven growth model was. And to make matters worse, it coincided with another trend that had been brewing for decades. The UK's productivity puzzle.
Okay, I've heard that term productivity puzzle before, but it always sounded like economic jargon to me. What does it actually mean?
In simple terms, productivity is about how efficiently you produce goods and services.
Okay.
The UK has struggled with low productivity growth compared to other developed nations.
There are a lot of theories about why. Some say it's underinvestment in technology and infrastructure.
Okay.
Others point to skills gaps in the workforce.
So if your productivity isn't keeping up with the rest of the world, you're falling behind.
Exactly. It's like running a race where everyone else is getting faster, but you're stuck at the same speed.
Right.
And then just when you thought the UK couldn't catch a break, along came Brexit.
Yeah, talk about adding fuel to the fire, the uncertainty around Brexit, the debates about trade deals, the
Right.
pound going up and down like crazy. It all created chaos, didn't it?
It certainly did. And while the long-term economic impacts of Brexit are still being debated,
Yeah.
there's no denying that it created a whole new layer of complexity for the UK.
Okay, so we've got this perfect storm brewing. Decline in manufacturing, over-reliance on finance.
Yeah.
Global financial crisis, low productivity, and then Brexit. What does all this mean for the people living in the UK, though? How is it impacting their daily lives?
That's where the phrase fading pound dream comes in.
The economic realities for a lot of people in the UK, both locals and immigrants, are pretty stark. Wages have stagnated. The cost of living, particularly housing, has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And there's a feeling that the opportunities that once drew people to the UK are diminishing.
Yeah, it's a real contrast to those historical narratives we were talking about earlier.
All right.
The UK used to be a magnet for talent and ambition, the place where people came to build a better life.
Yeah.
But now that image is being challenged by economic stagnation and fewer opportunities.
I'm curious, though. Haven't there been some good signs amidst all of this? I read that unemployment rates in the UK have been pretty low recently.
Yeah.
Doesn't that suggest at least some degree of economic health?
That's a great question. And it shows how economic data can sometimes be misleading.
Okay.
It's true that unemployment rates have been low,
Yeah.
but that doesn't tell the whole story.
How so?
One theory is that these low rates might actually be contributing to the UK's low productivity problem. Wait, hold on. How can low unemployment be bad for productivity?
Right.
I always thought they went together. More people working,
Yeah.
more goods and services being produced.
It does seem counterintuitive, but there's this idea that when labor markets are tight,
Okay.
businesses might be less likely to invest in things like automation or training.
Interesting.
Why spend money on improving efficiency when you can easily find workers, even if they're not as productive?
That makes sense.
So it's possible that the low unemployment rates have, in a way, masked some deeper issues within the UK economy.
Okay. So it's not just about having people in jobs, but making sure those workers can be productive in a modern economy.
Exactly. It's about quality, not just quantity.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to the question of solutions.
Right.
The UK is at a crucial point. The decisions they make now will have long-lasting effects. But the good news is they're not alone in facing these challenges. Other countries have gone through similar transformations and come out stronger.
Okay. So who are these economic role models? What can the UK learn from them?
Well, let's look at Germany.
Okay.
They've managed to keep a strong manufacturing base, even with the same global pressures as the UK.
How'd they do that?
One key factor is their focus on vocational training and apprenticeships.
Yeah.
It makes sure their workforce has the skills needed for high-value manufacturing.
So it's not just about cheap labor. It's about skilled workers who can make high-quality goods.
Exactly. They've also been strategic about building close ties between industry and research institutions.
Okay.
They've created an environment where innovation can thrive.
Right.
And then you have examples like China and India. Both have made huge progress in developing their tech sectors.
Yeah, they've really been pushing that.
They've invested heavily in STEM education and created policies that encourage entrepreneurship and innovation.
So it sounds like there's no single solution, but there are lessons to be learned from these different approaches.
Absolutely. And that's what the UK needs to take away from this. They need to be bold and innovative in finding their own way forward. It's not about copying others. It's about identifying their strengths and weaknesses and creating a strategy that works for them.
So what might a UK-specific solution look like? Where should they focus?
Well, one thing that comes up a lot is the need to diversify the economy.
Okay.
They need to move away from relying so much on finance.
Right, like we talked about earlier.
Exactly. They need to build a more balanced system. That includes manufacturing a thriving tech sector and industries with high growth potential like renewable energy.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. And to diversify, they need to invest strategically in areas like infrastructure, education, and research and development.
So laying the groundwork for long-term growth, not just quick fixes.
Precisely. And this brings us to another important point, attracting and retaining talent.
Okay.
The UK used to be a global center for skilled professionals. But Brexit and the competitive global landscape have made it harder to attract the best minds.
I've heard immigration policies have become a big debate in the UK. Some want stricter controls. Others think opening up to skilled immigration is key for growth.
It's a complex issue with strong opinions on both sides.
Definitely.
But from an economic perspective, it's clear that the UK needs to attract talent from around the world. They need to create an environment that's welcoming to professionals, entrepreneurs, and innovators, no matter where they come from.
Right, because talent drives innovation and growth in the global economy.
Exactly. And finally, there's the question of trade.
Okay.
Brexit has made trade more complex for the UK. They need to be strategic in building new relationships, especially with fast-growing economies in Asia and Africa.
So looking beyond their traditional partners and expanding their horizons.
Exactly, and it's not just about trade deals.
What else?
It's about finding ways to cooperate and collaborate on a global scale.
Okay, but collaboration means working together towards shared goals. Can the UK really do that while trying to chart its own course?
That's the big question, isn't it? Can they balance their national interests with the need for global cooperation? It's a delicate balancing act. Only time will tell how they navigate this new reality.
So it sounds like the UK is facing this challenge on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Not just economics, but also politics and even their philosophy.
Yeah.
They're trying to find their place in a world that's so different from the one they dominated a century ago.
Exactly. That brings us back to the main question we started with. Has the pound dream faded?
Right, because we've talked about the decline, the challenges, the possible solutions.
Yeah.
But what does it all mean for the average person? Is the UK still a place where people can build a good life? Or is that dream slipping away?
It's a tough question with no easy answers. The reality is that the UK is a nation of contrasts.
Okay.
You have London, which is still a global financial hub with lots of wealth and opportunity.
Right.
But then you have those former industrial towns that are struggling to adapt to the new economy.
I see.
You have highly skilled professionals in fields like tech and finance who are doing very well. But then you have people working in sectors hit hard by globalization and automation, facing real economic hardship.
So it's almost like there are multiple pound dreams happening at the same time. Some are doing well while others are struggling.
Exactly. And this difference is at the heart of many of the political and social debates in the UK today.
Makes sense.
How do you create an economy that works for everyone, not just a select few?
Yeah.
How do you bridge that gap between those who have a lot and those who have very little?
Right. Because if the dream is only possible for a small group of people, it's not a sustainable dream, is it?
Exactly. And that's why talking about the UK's economic future is so important.
Yeah.
It's not just about numbers and statistics. It's about people's lives, their hopes, their dreams for the future.
So where does that leave us? What should someone listening to this deep dive take away from all of this? What should they be looking out for as the UK's economic story continues?
I think the key takeaway is that the UK is at a crossroads. The decisions they make in the next few years will have a huge impact for decades to come. Will they embrace the need for change, for diversifying their economy, for investing in education and innovation? Will they find a way to close those regional gaps and create an economy that benefits everyone?
Sounds like they have some tough decisions to make.
They do. But it's also important to remember that the UK has a history of resilience,
Yeah.
of adapting to change, of reinventing itself. They've been through difficult times before and come out stronger.
So there's still hope for the UK.
There's always hope.
Yeah.
But hope without action is just a wish.
True.
It's up to the policymakers, the business leaders, and the British people to decide what kind of future they want.
Well, we certainly covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We explored the historical roots of the UK's economic decline.
Uh-huh.
We went deep into that productivity puzzle, and we looked at potential solutions that could help them find a new direction.
Yeah, and along the way, we learned some surprising things. We challenged some common beliefs
Right.
and hopefully got people thinking about the forces that shape not just the UK economy, but the global economy as a whole.
We hope this deep dive was helpful and interesting.
Yeah.
We encourage you to keep learning about these issues, to stay curious, and to keep asking those tough questions.
Definitely.
Because understanding the challenges facing the UK isn't just about their economy. It's about understanding the interconnected world we live in.
And as the UK tries to figure out its economic future, the choices they make and the path they take will have an impact far beyond their own borders.
So keep an eye on the UK. Their story is far from over. The next chapter is still being written. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating look at the world around us.